welcome to another edition of Humble Theology. My name is John, and in this series we are continuing to look at the Westminster Confession of Faith. We are finishing out chapter 7 of God's covenant with man, and we're at the last section, like I said, section 6, dealing with the covenant of grace. So let's read that, and then we'll kind of, like we usually do, or I usually do, pick it apart and kind of talk about some of the pieces there. So it says, or it reads, under the gospel, when Christ the substance was exhibited, the ordinances in which this covenant is dispensed are the preaching of the word and the administration of the sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper, which, though fewer in number, and administered with more simplicity and less outward glory, yet in them it is held forth in more fullness, evidence, and spiritual efficacy to all nations, both Jew and Gentiles, and is called the New Testament. There are not, therefore, two covenants of grace, differing in substance, but one and the same, under various dispensations. So I'm going to break this into 3 parts. The first part, again, let's just look at the first statements kind of being made there. Under the gospel, when Christ the substance was exhibited. So what changed in the gospel and the coming of Christ in relation to the covenant of God? Well, as we said in the previous ones, in the covenant of grace, God's new means of holding relationship with man. So the first covenant, first relationship with mankind was based on works. The covenant of works, the agreement, you could say, of works, that man would live before God based on his own inherently and as created righteous creature. And he was to live and maintain that love and honor and glory for God perpetually. And yet Adam disobeyed. So that being the standard of righteousness, all mankind fell in Adam. So we have that Romans 5 throughout. We see the impact of the fall. So the new substance or the new grounds of our relationship with Christ is based on God's grace. So we call that the covenant, or our relationship of grace with God. And well, we say that changed Old Testament to New Testament. You could even say the new covenant is because as Christ fulfills the relationship, it becomes more apparent as to who the Old Testament was talking about. It says, under the gospel, when Christ the substance became exhibited, or was revealed, it comes to fruition. You no longer have just the types and shadows, but Christ himself comes. So it's something new. It's something greater than what you had before. It says then the ordinances in which this covenant is dispensed. So how do we remember it? How do we celebrate it? How do we honor it? The coming of Christ? Well, just as in the Old Testament, they had various ceremonies and all kinds of rituals in the temple and sacrifices that pointed ahead to the work of the Messiah, the Redeemer. What would he be like? What would he do? What would he accomplish in his various roles? Well, that is fleshed out or fulfilled in the New Testament. So there's fewer. The ordinances that Christ leaves us with to reflect upon his accomplishments and his works are dispensed in the preaching of the word and the administration of the sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper. So we have these 3 things, it says, the word, baptism, and the Lord's Supper. Now, it gives us a description of those. So that's the main statement. Well, what do we have under the gospel? We have Christ, who is the substance of everything the Old Testament spoke about. And in Christ, he leaves his church, the ordinances of his word, baptism, Lord's Supper. Okay, so now descriptive work. The confession says, which, though fewer in number and administered with more simplicity and less outward glory, yet in them it is held forth in more fullness, evidence, and spiritual efficacy to all nations, both Jews and Gentiles, and is called the New Testament. So we're getting a definition of what the New Testament even is in the revelation and person and work of Christ and the administration we follow as in the New Testament. So walking through this, fewer in number. Yeah, we have the word, baptism, Lord's Supper. Is your church faithful to these very simple but plain but meaningful things? Because they are the summary of everything that the Old Testament had pointed to in his work and accomplishments. And the confession admits these are very simple. They hold very much less outward glory. Because you think about it, you have a priest adorned in robes and in garments, and in different gems on the chest plate. And you had altars and things in the temple of gold, and just the temple itself, a majesty, of architectural design in what it represented and what was conducted there. It was definitely more glorious than what we see things as today. But it says, yet held forth in these is the more fullness, evidence, and spiritual efficacy. It points to the greater fulfillment of everything those things pointed to. So in everything that was the greatness surrounding the temple and the sacrifice, well, we see that Jesus is, in a sense, the temple. Destroy this body in 3 days, I'll raise it up again. They didn't understand that he was talking about his body. And he is the sacrifice. So in those things that outwardly, wow, the huge temple and all these sacrifices, and you see the flames and the priests in their garments and all this stuff, yeah, it's a lot more show to it. So when you come to the New Testament, you say, well, baptism, Lord's Supper, and the right, correct preaching and teaching of the word. Oh, it's not very awe-inspiring to just see those things conducted. They look very simple. And yet it says this is now open to all the nations, both Jew and Gentiles. And Gentiles actually means the nations. It's more inclusive of the world or everyone. As the temple, all that stuff belonged to the Jews exclusively. If you were to join the church in the Old Testament, you'd be joining the Jewish population at the temple and things like that, and their synagogues. But now in the New Testament, it's open to all nations. All people have access to Christ. And this is what we mean when we refer to, or as the confession is saying, this is what we mean when we refer to the New Testament. It is a testament of Jesus. It is a testament as to his will, his word, his accomplishments. And it says, in summary, then the last statement there says, there are not, therefore, two covenants of grace, differing in substance, but one and the same under various dispensations. Oh, you're a Reformed, Presbyterian, Calvinistic person, and you're talking about dispensations. Yes, we do. We believe in dispensations, but the use of the word is not to cut things so solidly that they have no similarities or no continuity, no continuance whatsoever. Our dispensationalist friends cut things as black and white. The Old Testament is the old, the New Testament is new, and never shall the two meet. There's no continuity. There's only discontinuity, and they keep them separate. We say no. What was depicted in the Old Testament, in the covenant of grace, that God's relationship with man, salvation by faith, by belief, is the same in the New Testament. The difference being, in the Old, you had foreshadowed who the Redeemer, Messiah would be, who the Christ would be. And in the New Testament, you have the fleshing out of who that person is. But it's still one and the same. You don't say your shadow is so distinct from you, the person, that they are totally devoid of one or the other. Well, no, the shadow wouldn't have any existence without the person who's casting it. So So these things it's what the confession is trying to get across, that under the covenant of grace, Christ is the one substance under the old and the new. All is pointing to him. So there's a continuity of what's being discussed in both. Yet we believe dispensationally that there is a difference in the way the church conducted itself prior to Christ, waiting and looking for him to come, versus his actual arrival and what he gave the church thereafter. There's a difference. And again, I've addressed this as the difference of going to a movie or a concert. What you do leading up to the concert and waiting in line and buying your tickets is way different than once the venue opens and you go in and enjoy the concert and whatever follows after that, or the movie. You go in and get your seat and watch it. The continuity is that you're there for the music group or the movie at hand. That stays the same in both before and after. But you can't possibly do both. If you go into the movie theater and it's not ready or open yet, well, you're trespassing and there's no movie playing. There's no point in being there. You're waiting in line and buying your ticket and preparing and all that stuff. It's just the opposite. If you've done all the preparing and waiting in line and buying your ticket, and the movie opens, it's ready to start playing, but you just say, well, I'm just going to stand in line because that's what was appropriate now. And that's totally different. What you're saying is to go in and watch it. I don't believe that. Well, again, you're missing the continuity. You're appreciating there's a difference of before and after. But if you're cutting that in such a distinct line to say that the two have no relation, the two can't possibly have a connection, then you're missing the point of what the general central focus is. So yeah, that's it for this lesson. Hope you're appreciating the series going through the Westminster Confession of Faith. You can join me on my other channel. I hope to post there soon, Theology Prepper, where I'm going to start trying to use that channel to look at maybe some more current events in relation to Christian faith and obviously from a Reformed and covenantal perspective. If you have topic suggestions, you can leave them for me on those videos back on that channel or even here, and we'll try to address those. But for now, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff. And we'll work on the next video, or I'll work on the next video. You come back and watch. Thank you so much for your time. God bless. Bye-bye.